On Saturday, February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States of America launched a massive war operation against Iran, codenamed Operation Epic Fury by the US and Operation Roaring Lion by Israel. This operation was so widespread across Iran, affecting various cities and regions such as Tehran, Is-fahan, Karaj and Kermanshah, and more than 1,000 munitions were used through day one alone. But even as the scale of the attack was quite remarkable and unprecedented, it was not the scale that proved more significant. More significant was that some of those strikes actually targeted Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he was assassinated as a result, with more than 40 other top government and military officials. It was quite a huge blow to Iran, and a major slap in the face, especially as it was coming hot on the heels of high-intensity diplomacy between Iran and the US. The last one, a third round, just concluded in Geneva, Switzerland, the day before, and described by the Iranians as very positive and fruitful. Even the Omani coordinator of the dialogue also described the results in such glowing terms. Everything seemed to be getting back towards resolution and normalcy between the sides, and the Iranians felt they were properly on the right track towards possibly an unprecedented rapprochement with the US, only for Israel and the United States to initiate a shocking and unnerving surprise attack the very following morning. This same scenario had played out previously in June 2025, when Israel and the United States had also attacked Iran hot on the heels of another serious round of negotiations with the US on Iran's nuclear program. Everything had appeared to be moving along well on the diplomatic front when Israel suddenly began attacks across Iran's nuclear and missile sites across the country, targeting and killing numerous Islamic Republic military leaders and top scientists, clerics, and academics considered related to Iran's nuclear and missile development. The attack was so devastating and took Iran almost 24 hours to coordinate the necessary accessories to respond with attacks of its own against Israel. Attempts were even made against Iran's top political leaders, including President Pezeshkian, but he and many others alongside survived that initial 12-day attempt. It was around the 10th day of that tit-for-tat exchange that the US and President Trump finally joined the fray on Israel's side and behalf, and deployed its much-vaunted B-2 stealth bombers with their 2,000-pound bombs flying in right out from mainland United States to deliver their payloads on Iran's most fortified nuclear development sites, which Trump subsequently boasted had been totally obliterated. Added to that, more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles had reportedly been deployed alongside from US warships in the Gulf region, targeting other easier-to-reach sites of the Iranian missile program and nuclear enrichment and other facilities. Having done that final one major stunt on behalf of Israel, and Iran having given its well-calibrated but effective strike back against the United States' largest base in the Middle East, the Al-Udeid Air Base, Trump decided to call for a cessation of hostilities, calling it the end of the matter. A war that, having so ended, had brought about a final end to all war between the two sides, Israel and Iran, and was heralding an era of total and lasting peace. Iran, having done proportionate justice in executing its own counterattacks against both Israel and the United States, also complied and ceased operations. Yet, not long after, it became clear that the cessation of hostilities was insincere and only a pause by the Israelis and Americans to regroup. It became clearer from statements subsequently made by Trump and Israeli officials that it had been just a ruse and it would only be a matter of time for hostilities to resume between the belligerents. So, in the first instance, the Americans, and by extension, the Israelis, had obviously entered into negotiations in bad faith when they had called for Iran to engage them in talks, and Israel still pressed ahead to attack Iran just as soon as the day after. The war had been ended, but rhetoric had still remained hostile. America, and, by extension, Israel, had also very obviously again negotiated in bad faith. A second time, when Trump had decided to assemble a large armada of 2 aircraft carriers and their supporting vessels and warships around the shores of Iran, as well as a substantial deployment of additional military personnel to the region, and stealth and other specialized aircraft, in order to coerce Iran into what he called talks. I have already mentioned before that it seems that what we have now with the US in the present administration, after what they went to do in Venezuela, and what they have been doing and attempting to do all across the world on Greenland, Canada, and tense trade renegotiations, and bullying tariffs across the world, including against closest and staunchest allies. I have already said that America, no longer interested to negotiate with others around the world, it now just prefers to impose, even among its closest historical allies. In other words, in the current system of leadership, America is averse to allies. It is about what they have termed America first, but worse than that. It might be more appropriately termed America only. So they said they were in for negotiations with Iran. Finally, Iran entered into talks after much suspicion and hesitation. They came through 3 rounds of negotiations, and it appeared Iran had made major concessions to move the process over the line, leading to many actors involved openly calling prospects very productive and much promising. Just as soon as that had seemed the case, promising, Israel struck, not just striking military or nuclear infrastructure targets, but actually attacking sovereign military, political and religious leadership of Iran, assassinating over 45 top Islamic Republic leaders across the country, including a host of their relations indiscriminately. This time around, Iran responded promptly. Within the hour. It had been caught completely off guard the first time. This time too, it had been caught off guard again. But not totally, because contingencies had been thought out and already kept ready in advance, in view of the tense nature of the prevalent atmosphere. And this time, Iran responded more ferociously and determinedly and much more precisely from its position of nursing severe pain and loss and the desire to impose as much cost on aggressors that they might ultimately completely be warded off for the final time. Iran has struck just about everywhere across the Middle East that US military maintain a base or major presence. They have struck across all of America's bases and civilian military accommodations and offshore platforms, such as warships and aircraft carrier. And Iran has pummeled Israel quite ferociously, more widely, more accurately, and more damagingly than the first time around during the 12-day war. Especially as this time around it appears enemy air defense systems across the region have been far less effective or leaking much worse than during the First War. But here is the thing most people do not realize or especially factor into the present cycle of hostilities. The first time around, Israel had been much more exposed. Much of their data and development science assets, even a lot of critical government assets had been highly exposed, and they had lost quite a substantial amount even in research data, that they had to quickly rush for a ceasefire. The damage that Iran could have further inflicted on the nation had that 12-day encounter continued would have been very astronomical, much more devastating and perhaps even singularly existential. This time around, though, they would have had the 8 months to prepare and move much critical and sensitive materials and data out of harm's way, into much more secure unlisted locations around and even specially prepared bunkers. So, Israel is not quite as vulnerable as it was during the First War, even if it may be sustaining far more strikes and damage from Iranian missiles. An overriding amount of the damage would be physical and surface. The real treasures of state rebuilding and existence and progress would have already been moved to far more secure spaces, awaiting the end of the conflict for government to resurface and assess surface catastrophe, but with the distinct possibility to be able to rebuild other infrastructure with greater ease. I can only hope Iran itself may have also already carried out such assessments and made the widespread contingency plans for itself regarding future recovery at the end of this savage brutality. Physical structures can be rebuilt relatively easily, but there are other fragile assets and data materials of strategic importance to development which cannot be so easily accounted for or rebuilt. Which is why I reckon that inasmuch as Iran may garner and maintain more firepower and perhaps even more destructive potential than Israel in this conflict, those 8 months of observing from the sidelines while America negotiated in bad faith on its own behalf, and it and the United States had already decided and knew they were always still going to war with Iran, no matter what. And Iran had come out and renegotiated with the US with obvious suspicion and much distrust, but in good faith and with ultimately a little hope at least things might actually work out somehow, without realizing the singular duplicity and completely bad faith that Israel and the United States were operating by. That they had already long decided beforehand they were only using negotiations as the smokescreen to distract Iran and probe for weakness, whilst they themselves were fully preparing deeply and extensively for a war they knew they had already decided they were going to prosecute whatever the outcome from negotiations. That certainty in American and Israeli minds that they were going to wage the war and so had already begun the past 8 months to move most important and critical strategic assets far away from harm's way. And Iran's uncertainty over the ultimate inevitability of the war and therefore perhaps never having properly done the mirror image securing of critical state and technological assets adequately away from harm's way. That is the real reason I believe this will be a really difficult war for Iran to prosecute completely and win. Had Iran understood the complete depth of the bad faith of the Americans and Israelis from the very beginning, they might have declined to cease fire immediately during that 12-day conflict and perhaps gone on to inflict much firmer and painful damage on Israel, before finally determining to accept a more stable and durable ceasefire with Israel, ultimately mediated by more neutral parties. Today's war conditions are far more different from that first. Israel and the United States had first come out to test and they had learned how devastating Iran could be. And they had gone back and set their house in order, prepared and then come back out for a better round. Now perhaps they may be praying and waiting that Iran might totally expend of her stockpiles of missiles and other arsenal, and then it be left completely defenseless to a complete routing and takeover. America does not tolerate any other country having even a single foothold or influence around its hemisphere. Yet it trots around the globe creating insecurity and a mess in every other region. If you enjoy listening to alternative sources and new perspectives to world affairs, don't hesitate to like, subscribe and leave your comments below.